Firstly, welcome Mike and Noel. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real privilege for us to be able to chat with you guys and ask you some questions. So thank you. First, we've got a few questions for Mike, and then we've got some questions for Noel.
What was the hardest period in your career and why?
Question 1 from Alonso, the hardest period in my career. It was the American tour with Split Enz. Mainly just everything was wrong. One, the new wave had arrived, bands like Blondie, Talking Heads, Television, and we were pretty old-fashioned, in fact, kind of stupid, all made up, strange hair, funny costumes, and we just realised that the industry, especially in the States, didn't have room for us. And they tried all sorts of weird competitions and stuff, who can have the funniest hair and all that kind of crap. So we felt that the songs weren't getting through. We believed in the songs. First and foremost, Split Enz was about the great songs and the live performances. It didn't work, and that was the start of the end, really.
Did your phobia affect your relationships and career? If so, why?
My phobia, agoraphobia. I didn't know I had it. All the time I was in Split Enz and Citizen Band, I just thought I had a madness, and so I just hid it. I can't be very good at hiding things, and so I would never say that I was fearful or scared, or I would take tranquilizer drugs, and that lasted for a long time. However, it's a hollow victory. You end up kind of dreamy and sleepy. I'd be the one in the back of the van going from London to Bristol with my nodding head, and it didn't work. So in the end, I knew I had to leave the band, because agoraphobia and travel just don't mix. Agoraphobia is all about wanting to be in the place where you feel really safe. And for me, that was Auckland. And there I was in Bristol, Durham, Boston, Holland, Perth, Adelaide, and on and on and on and on. It just became too much.
How do you think the music industry has changed ever since you were young?
Question 3 from Mia, how has the industry changed? Well, it's changed incredibly. We came through, the band was formed at a time when there were basically two sectors in New Zealand. There was one, a whole bunch of people wearing ball gowns and bow ties and dinner suits that were on TV. And so they broke songs, but a lot of those songs were from overseas. They weren't written here. There was only one band really that succeeded, especially on the radio, and that was The Formula, with songs like Nature. And the other side of the coin were the kind of long-haired hippie university circuit. So while we were inside the four walls of the universities, we just made every attempt to not be that and to not be that, to have first and foremost great music, great lyrics, and a stage performance that basically shunted everybody else to the side. We put a lot of work in. We never played pubs. We only did concerts. And in the end, that effort, really serious rehearsals and serious attitude to the concerts, it paid off. Then when I left the band, I was in Citizen Band, and so New Zealand had changed. A pub rock culture came in with Hello Sailor, The Dudes, Street Talk, and Citizen Band. I really enjoyed that, as long as we were playing in Auckland and I didn't have to travel. And we did play Auckland a lot, and I had a good time. It was a special, unique bubble in the New Zealand music world.
Do you miss having CDs and records? Do you prefer streaming platforms are better, and if so, why?
Right, do I miss CDs and albums? Well, not really. I had a long time with albums, vinyl, and then I had a long time with CDs. But now I can hear anything I want. So if I want to hear 21st Century Schizoid Man, I can have it playing anywhere in this house in a matter of seconds. And to me, that's a great thing. I don't think that the quality of vinyl is any better than the streaming or the CDs, because they used to irritate me, all that that used to go on. And there is a novelty. My kids, they go from 33 down to 19. They have turntables and vinyl. For them, it's a novelty, and that's fine. But no, I'd rather just be able to listen to whatever I want to listen to at any time of the day or night. And in this beautiful world we're in, I can do that.
How long does it take for you to write a song?
What do you think makes a good song?
Okay, we better clarify this from the start. I'm not a songwriter. Yes, I tried many years ago. But in my first band, there were two songwriters, Phil Judd and Tim Finn, and they would probably every Sunday at rehearsal at Kohimarama Beach bring along a new song, and they would just be stupendously beautiful, wonderful songs. Mine were complete junk, so I just accepted that. It's a bit like if I thought it would be wonderful to be a fullback for the All Blacks, but every single time I went to kick the ball I missed it, then I wouldn't be a fullback for the All Blacks. But I might have been a great hooker, because I weigh 200 kilograms. So all of that aside, I have been very lucky to have been in bands with great songwriters. My brother Jeffrey in Citizen Band, and Phil and Tim in Split Enz. And also just to be part of an industry where young songwriters were coming through, and especially in my years at APRA, there were 4,500 songwriters, members of APRA. And, I got to know quite a lot of them, and I got to watch what they do, how they do it, think about the songs. I ran the Silver Scroll Awards, and so people would vote for that. I'd be part of the committee. I didn't actually vote, but I was part of the committee that would get together and they would talk about the songs, what makes them good. I do have very clear protocols, let's call them, as to what a song needs. Okay, part two, what makes a song good? Well, people say to me, I never listen to the words, I don't care about the words, but actually they do care about the words. Because if we did a whole lot of junk words to a song like Hey Jude, like hey everybody, I'm going to a birthday party and I hope there's some cake, I hope the cake's really good, all of that kind of crap, they're not going to like the song. They may not care about who Jude is or the actual journey that they're taken on, but they need to be taken on a journey, on an arc in the lyrics. The other thing is hooks. So we all know hooks, because if every one of you thought of a song that you love, think about what is it in that song that you wait for, and when it comes, it excites you. That's the hook. Usually it's a melody, but often the words are important in a hook. The other thing are things like pauses. You've got to have space between the words. So a song like Hey Jude, don't make it bad. If McCartney had run them all together, hey Jude, my dear old friend, don't make it bad. I wish I could see you more often, and if I could, we could have a good time. Wouldn't that be fun? That's nonsense. So it's all those little things but you all know what makes a song good, because you all have songs that are your favourites. Just think about it. Why do I like that song? And analyse that.
What inspired you to start Play It Strange?
And what is your favourite thing about it?
Play It Strange. Well, Play It Strange came about because I believe that at schools, songwriting, writing your own songs, should be encouraged, should be a culture that the whole school celebrates. And if someone enters the Play It Strange songwriting competition and wins it, say, the headmaster should invite those songwriters at that school onto the stage to sing it to them. I would say that happens once a decade. It doesn't seem to me that the understanding, let's use a fancy word, the cognizance of how much work goes into writing a song that thousands of people love and will want to listen to for decades and decades. Something like Dave Dobbins' Be Mine Tonight, or Tim Finn's 6 Months in a Leaky Boat, or Jordan Luck's Why Does Love Do This to Me? Those songs sound simple. I don't know. What is so great about that? Well, the fact is, if you go to an All Black game and they play it on a stereo system over the park, the minute they push stop, the crowd keeps singing it. Why do the crowd keep singing it? Because they love it, and they won't ever let Jordan take it away. And that's what songwriting can be about, and it should be like that at schools. So Play It Strange was really there to foster an interest in writing songs. And through the competition recording sessions, which if you're picked in the final selection, they go up on Spotify and Bandcamp and all the streaming platforms. And so you could be sitting in Iceland, and play the Play It Strange album. That's how it works. And it's a magical thing.
How did you develop agoraphobia and how did you deal with it?
I developed agoraphobia. One, our family has not a propensity for it. It has a weak link in its psychic chain. So my sister got it. One of my sons had a phobic problem. We are just built in a fragile way. I didn't know this because I wasn't aware that my uncle had agoraphobia down in Christchurch in the 60s. He never talked about it. So I got hit with it. And that came about pretty much from stress. I was deeply stressed about a couple of things we won't go into here. And there was a big collapse. And so that's how I got it. I didn't talk about it. I kept it hidden very successfully.
What got you into the music?
What got me going in the world of music? The world of music, when I was a kid, say in the 50s, I would hear songs that would be played on the radio. Back then they didn't play radio songs all the time. You might hear a song, say, every half an hour, every hour. But I fell in love with them. A lot of them are American, mainly American, apart from Cliff Richard, who came out of England. I loved them. But then I was only about 7 years old. It wasn't until I saw A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles that I was absolutely transfixed on being one. I wanted to be a Beatle. And when I went to boarding school, which I hated, I had a classmate in Tim Finn. My brother Jeffrey was a great guitar player, really good drummer. So we all started just pretending we were Beatles. And that really was what dominated my teenage years, was wanting to play in a band that wrote songs. I tried writing songs. I found it to be the hardest thing in the world. But I loved playing. I loved getting on a stage. I used to get our music class to not play any music or throw away Delius and all that stuff. And I say, brother, do you mind if Tim Finn and I get on the stage and sing some songs to the class? And he said, fine, off you go. So our performing skills got going pretty quickly. This was when we were in fourth form. That was year 10 in 1967, the year of Sgt. Pepper's. And that seemed to motivate us because we just loved the Beatles every step of the way. And I think without them, the world would have been a darker place.
Are there any hidden messages, themes, personal features in your costume? If so, what are they and why are they there?
Miriam, a tricky one. There was nothing really hidden. It was all on show. And really, the costumes essentially were about just entertainment. It seemed perfectly logical to me to dress up when you go on stage. And that was pretty much the driving force of it all.
Why did you start to wear the costumes?
Look, as a sort of art student, I started making my own clothes, and that I was doing that before I got involved on that level with the band. And it was I don't know, still don't really remember exactly. I just thought the band was doing only a few performances, because we only did original music. It was quite hard to get gigs unless you were doing covers in those days. And so each show was quite an elaborate arrangement, and often we'd do two halves with a change of scenery and all sorts of things. And we had extras, you know, Highland pipe band players and extra drummers and walk-on parts. And then that sort of evolved, I guess, to once we started going. That was always just in Auckland. Once we went out on the road, you sort of couldn't take all that with you. And around that same time, I just made a set of costumes for everyone. And in fact, they premiered in Founders Theatre in Hamilton. Yeah, that was the first time that everyone donned the gear. And I had no idea really. I just took them along and said, here, hand them out to everyone, and everyone put them on and laughed at each other, and then thought, oh, this is all right. So kind of went from there. And then it was a matter of just, for me at least, creatively doing the next thing. You know, I wasn't going to get stuck like Kiss, where you're just the one image. It always felt to me like it needed to progress, and that's sort of essentially what happened over the years.
When did you decide to wear makeup as a band, and were there any disagreements about wearing it?
So it's probably around the same time as the costumes, and that was also just part of the entertainment package. Slap on the grease paint. It was just part of that kind of stage presentation that seemed natural. There was never any disagreements, except I just left everyone to do their own thing. Occasionally I'd do a little bit of work on someone, but everyone just had to figure out their comfortable level of slap, like how much you're going to put on and how successful it was. And sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. It didn't sort of really matter that much. But it didn't take long for everyone to get sort of practiced at it, if you like. And it was also part of, and getting dressed, but doing the makeup was part of a sort of preparation for going on stage that brought us all together in the backstage environment with an hour or so to just mentally adjust to what we're about to do, rather than walking in off the street, going in and starting. And I think that was actually really helpful for doing.
How did you meet the other people in the band?
Met the other band members when I went to university in Auckland, to art school. So Phil Judd was at art school, Rob Gillies was at art school, myself, we were all in the same year. Phil and Tim were living in the halls of residence, the university halls of residence. That's how they got together, and so it just kind of formed from there. Most of them have been involved in music before that, but it was just evolved really from those initial relationships. And pretty much we're all still in touch one way or another. It's it's like a family that you kind of imagine while it's all going along that there's just this group of guys, but it was 13 years for me with them, and that was pretty intense, always with them sort of times. And you get to know people pretty well, and I guess what keeps us together now in a sense is that it's still an ongoing kind of business, if you like. There's always something you have to deal with or need to talk about, even like the reissue of True Colours, for instance, this year. It's just, things like that keep coming up where you need to remain in communication with people to just make sure things happen the way you want them to, I guess.
How did the success of True Colours change the band?
Well, I think True Colours came at a time when we really needed a hit, because we hadn't ever been a band that dwelt on that, and not long before that period of the band, the record company had dropped us because we'd done some demos for a new album. They couldn't hear a single. They said, we need a single, and we went, nah, we're just going to do this, take it or leave it, and they left it. So that left us at a period of time in England with no record company and no management and stuff. But we spent a year writing, and so by the time we came around to that album, we'd probably had about 60 songs under the belt, although a lot of them ended up being written just before, because there was always, with two prolific writers in the band, there was always new stuff coming along. And yeah, basically it paid off like 10 years worth of debt initially, and got us to a much broader world market. So the touring cycle really amped up then. We were on the road after that album for nearly 18 months. So it was a long haul. But yeah, it meant there was a bit of commercial success and a bit of money. And so yeah, moving on was made a lot easier from there.
You're recently making music with Eddie and Tim from Split Enz under the name Forensics. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so Forensics just came about really from, well, initially Tim and Eddie, but this notion that Tim had when we were recording in England with Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music, who we'd done a tour with in Australia, and we sort of made a connection and went to England to record with him. Brian Eno came into the studio to have a listen, and he just picked out some very small parts of one song. I mean, the quote that I remember of Eno was that he listened to a track we'd done and he said, "Oh, make a great album." Because in those days the arrangements were quite complex and there was a whole lot of parts to most songs. But he had chosen this piece from Walking Down a Road, and it was just a little guitar thing that was going on, and Tim had in his mind for years that why did he pick that? So we'll take that bit and elaborate on it somehow. And that was the starting point. So the idea was to take parts of early Enz songs and loop them, and then build stuff on top of it and create a new thing out of it. And that's essentially what happened. But of course that was pandemic time, and so we're just sending files to each other. We've never got in a room together to play any of it. But that's kind of a nice way to do things as well after a while, I know those guys well enough. Don't have to be in the same room with them.
What were your inspirations as a young musician?
Going way back, I suppose, my first interest was blues. So some of the first records I bought were things like Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf, hardcore sort of traditional blues. And that was pretty much the result of a radio show that I listened to occasionally that was out of Wellington. And then I didn't really buy much music after that. But what I guess we were listening to at the kind of age group that these guys are at was mainly radio. And radio was a top 40 format. It wasn't compartmentalised into different genres, so you got to hear a lot of stuff just on the popular radio stations, which was great. So that's where I first got a notion of reggae and ska. Like Millie Small, My Boy Lollipop was a record that came out and was a hit all over the world. I'd never heard of ska or knew anything about Jamaican or Caribbean music, but that's something that just kind of caught my ear then. And then I guess as I got older, it was probably primarily English music that was the driver for me. The Stones, Led Zeppelin, and a quite eclectic sort of arrangement of music came to the band once the band started to form, because everyone had their own kind of background of what they were into. So Bob Gillies, the trumpet and sax player, he'd come from a background of brass bands, and so he had brass band records. It's like, oh, you should listen to this. I go, yeah, that's quite good. And I mean, one of my earliest things, actually going back to the question, was that I can remember holding Mum's hand at some street procession and a Highland Pipe band came past, and that just blew my mind. The drums together and the guy on the bass drum, and the regalia, everything. It was just that's possibly one of the most pivotal kind of inspirational moments in music for me, because it had the combination of drones, multiple drums, and an amazing get-up, and that I don't know how deeply that went, but possibly now thinking about it, it had started something in a tiny brain.
What inspirations did you have for your album artwork?
Well, as far as album covers designing goes, it often was, well, sometimes it would be linked to a name. Once you had recorded and got a group of songs together, then you'd have to have a name for it, and then maybe that would or wouldn't spin off into a graphic idea. But part of what drove, well, yes, considering also that vinyl is a 12-inch by 12-inch format, quite big physically, but in terms of representing that in the press particularly, you'd end up often with a single column picture of your album cover, which is, that sort of big. And quite often, for me, it was always about making a graphic impression that you would read at any size and recognise. So it was more about the graphic sort of layout than the imagery necessarily. True Colours was a pretty exceptional album cover in a lot of ways. There was 11 different colour combinations, or up to date, there have been. Initially it went out with 3 different colour combinations, and that was a major hurdle with the record company. They couldn't comprehend that you would have different album covers for the same album, and that might confuse people. I think people aren't that stupid. They're looking at a Split Enz album, it's called True Colours, there's 3 different colours, choose the one you like, and that proved to be really sort of popular and successful concept. So after the first 3, there were another 3, then there was a gold and silver one when the album went platinum, and then a few other subsequent ones, and it was just a matter of each time there was some milestone with that album, it just come up with a different combination.
How did it feel seeing your ideas come out? What was it like seeing your artwork in shops?
Well, it was a vindication, I suppose, of the concept that you want a graphically impactful thing. Like, photos don't work that well in my mind in that context. So like the True Colours one's a good example. You can see it and recognise it immediately, no matter what size or colour combination it is. But I suppose one of the weird things about that in context of the True Colours album anyway, was that a lot of people never saw the E and Z on it. And even today, I talk to people and go, I never knew that. It was just an arrangement of triangles and squares and stuff. And I thought that was really obvious when I did it. I thought, that's cool, E and Z. Because E and Z's a great graphic formula. As 3 letters, E and Z, there's a lot of ways that they can fit together. But that was just an example of that particular thing. But yeah, it was always gratifying to see a display. And that kind of also was about whether or not was regarded as current or happening enough, I suppose, in record shops to get space.
Dora, my name is Aiden. My question is, what was it like recording your first song?
Well, for any young band, it's a big moment, and especially back then, there wasn't really options to record yourself like we have now. Modern technology's made it very easy for people to record at home or in a rehearsal situation. So we went into a proper studio, Stebbings in Auckland, and it was just really about playing more than the process. Someone else, essentially the engineer, was in charge of recording it. So really, you just went in, and it was only a couple of singles we did. Well, the first one was a single, 2 songs. Probably did it in an afternoon.
What did you miss about recording and why?
Well, the recording process, to me, it was always like a little bit of a version of music, because you went into the studio after a period of rehearsal and working up new material ready to record. And to me, that was always by far the best part of it all. That was just the band in a room spontaneously working off each other and arranging new material. To get into the studio, especially back in the 70s, you'd spend a day almost on a drum sound. So it'd be Doc sitting there with the snare drum, okay, Tom. And then it was also generally a process whereby the drums started and then you built everything on top of it. So each person's part was put together separately. And it's not that different now, but it just seemed to take away that spontaneous thing that occurs when you all play together.
What do you miss about performing and why? Did you also have any regrets after leaving Split Enz?
Performance is, I guess, quite addictive in some ways. Part of the greatness, I think, of a band performing is that in Split Enz were always good at this. It can be quite spontaneous. So we did a lot of jamming on stage, if the sound was right. And that comes with the comfort of knowing each other well in terms of, the musicians on stage together. So that, I think that was part of, I don't know, that was part of the live thing, was just that, the intimacy of playing together. And yeah, you do miss that to some extent, but touring's, pretty hard life, especially when it's as full on as it became for us. So you're travelling almost every day, and it's just a cycle of one hotel gig, late night, off again the next day somewhere else. That I don't miss that at all, and that no longer being a part of that really in my life was that from going from that full-on touring and performing cycle to not having to do that anymore. After the band broke up, I just kind of stepped back from it and thought, I've just given everything to this, and for the first time in my life I realised that I had the freedom to, for instance, enrol in a course. I actually learnt to weld after the band broke up, because it was the first time since I'd joined that I had Thursday nights free for the next 3 months. You never knew really more than a couple of months ahead, apart from perhaps when you were going into recording, what was going to be happening. So we were always on the hop, if you like. So that was a good thing. It was just stepping back a little bit, doing something else for a while, and not being so obsessed with that one thing in your life,
What did your family think of you becoming a musician?
There was no real history of, obviously history of music in my family. Although I found out Dad had a pretty good tenor voice, just accidentally. But initially I wanted to be an artist. So when I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do really, except I enjoyed art. And so it took me a long time to get through that process at school of actually even someone telling me there's a fine arts school in Auckland called Elam, and you could go there. And that's kind of where I started off. We did have a bit of a history of art in the family, a couple of aunts and other people who were artistic and painted and all the rest of it. But it was essentially driven by me not really being that sure about what I could do and what I really wanted to do even at that stage. But of course, getting to art school was just revolutionary. Suddenly I was gone from being the only weirdo at school doing art to being amongst a whole lot of peers who came from similar backgrounds all around the country. And that was actually where I transitioned to becoming a musician. We met the band members through the art school connection. Basically, my parents were fine with it, Don't think they thought there was much of a future in it, but, when you're 18 or 20 or whatever, and you've got a lot of time to sort that stuff out. But I think as they saw it building, they understood, the passion and the sense behind it.
Did you have a favourite costume?
Well, there was a few. I mean, mostly every tour there was one or two new sets of costumes. So between each album, I'd work up a new range of stuff. Some of them would have a fairly limited life, but others we wore as sort of variations over a theme over any tour. So we'd have 2 or 3 sets on tour, and you would swap them around occasionally. One set called the Black, White and Greys that we wore in the Icy Red film clip.
Yeah.
And then in True Colours, there was the sort of bright modern art kind of ones that also were, popular and we wore for a longer period than some of the others.
Was there anywhere the band didn't get a good reception?
Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them in the early days. We called it the stunned mullet effect, where you'd go on stage and play and there'd be like this light clap and you'd kind of look at it and people were obviously going, what is this? But having said that, it gained us fans as well. But probably America was the hardest territory to kind of crack as far as getting over that sort of weirdness thing. But we had no concerns about being weird.
What's your favourite Split Enz album?
My favourite albums are tricky. I mean, Mental Notes is still there because it's so ridiculously quirky, but also our first proper album. I think Time and Tide for me was a point where the band had reached a real sort of focused energy level and was starting to get into slightly deeper grooves, like Dirty Creature, for instance. And then I think Dysrhythmia for me was the other album that we recorded in their studios in London with the Beatles engineer. And he got great sounds, really beautiful acoustic sounds. There's a lot of acoustic guitar and stuff. It was that still kind of harking back to the early sound of the Enz, that album, but it was in a transitional phase where it was becoming a little bit more sort of rocky. So I guess those 3 would be up there for me. But they all have songs that I love and songs that I don't, So, yeah.